Hello and welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for choosing to spend your afternoon with us. I am Chirag Thakkar. I'm the Senior Associate Publisher at Bloomsbury India, the editor and publisher of the book we just revealed the cover for. And it is such an honor and pleasure for me to be here in conversation with Mr. Gopal Krishna Gandhi. Uh, when I think of Mr. Gandhi, I think of the difference between a writer and a great writer. I think of the difference between a public administrator and a spotless, honest public administrator. When I think of Mr. Gandhi, I think of the difference between a diplomat and a masterful diplomat. I think of the difference between a teacher and a legendary pedagogue. I think of the difference between a public intellectual and one of the best public intellectuals India has ever seen. And it is an honor that he's amongst us to unpack a variety of questions I have for him. If we have time towards the end, we'll perhaps also have you come in and ask us questions. So let's get started, Mr. Gandhi, and reflect on the journey you've had as a writer among the many, many caps you've worn in the decades of your public life. Mm, what kind of a writer did you think you would be when you started? And tell us about the kind of writer you've become when you look back at your own journey on the art of writing, the craft of writing.
I'd like to start by saying that it is an extraordinary pleasure to be in the city of Mysore. There is no city that is as beautiful as Mysore, and to come here is to redeem some hope from the prevailing gloom of our times. I should also say, in response to Chirag's question about what he describes as my journey as a writer, that this short journey from my chair there up the steps to the stage is daunting enough for somebody who is 80, but very daunting to somebody who is taking the stage after Banu Mushtaq. This is about the toughest journey I have had. And I am not just surprised, but deeply grateful and in some shock to see that there is anybody in the hall after Banu has left. What an extraordinary book she has given to us in the shape of this translation. I have not read all the stories. But to return to Chirag's question, what did I think of when I started off as a writer? I should say, I never started off as a writer. And if somebody says, I'm starting off as a writer, you can be sure that whatever he or she writes can be safely put aside. Banu Mushtaq has not started off or rounded off as a writer. She has written about life as it is. And so it is that I have stumbled into writing and written about life as I have known it.
And if you were to look back at your own body of work through meanderings, through circumstances, and this stumbling into writing, how do you look back at your journey as a writer? And what more is there to write?
Well, I look back not on my journey as a writer, but on about 8 decades lived in this very turbulent world with a sense of astonishment at having made it to this particular time, but also a sense of wonderment that I am here at all, that we are here at all, because we are living in the midst of multiple perils. And I speak for myself when I say that I end a day with gratitude and I start a day in a combination of fear and hope, of tremulation and joy when I see my grandchildren having lived through many, many decades, known only as the grandson of my grandfather, with no other description worth mentioning. It is a great relief now to be seeing myself not as a grandson, but as a grandfather. That is the sum and substance of my journey. And I hope and pray that my grandchildren will go through life in safety and without hatred and without fear.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi. To hope, as many of you would know, Mr. Gandhi recently published his memoir, The Undying Light, a personal history of independent India, copies of which are outside. After the session, he's more than happy for you to come to him and get him to sign a copy for you. And when I read, and of course you were gracious enough to have me at the launch as well, when I read your memoir, The Undying Light, three people stood out for me with repeated mentions. One is, of course, Rajaji, the other is M.S. Subbulakshmi, and the third would be Jayaprakash Narayan. Today, when you look back at these three people, influences, friendships, people who shaped some of your ideas, a part of your worldview, what are some fond memories that come to mind when you look back at these three?
Let me change the order a bit and start with M.S. Subbulakshmi. She was, for me, a dreamlike figure whom I had seen as an infant and whom I had seen into my very late life and her extremely late life. There was something unreal about her, that a person with her inner glow and of course her beauty, her sense of complete identification with the music that was her life, and at the same time her being so vulnerable as a person, that has left me enchanted. She was many things to everyone, a great singer, a great screen personality, but above all, she was a person who was made in the mold of convention, living as a person who is a diva is expected to live, being very punctual, being very prompt, being very particular, being very perfect, holding her emotions in herself. But once on the stage, just herself. Even the repertory of her songs for her concert, I am told, was virtually given to her. It was certainly expected by the audience to follow a certain method. So she started off as the product of public expectation and general esteem, but once she started singing, she was herself. And a kind of fluxion took place. There was a meltdown when thoughts and feelings she could not express in her life publicly, she was now able to do so in the untrammeled flow of her emotion through her music. And every time she sang, I at least felt that she was becoming Madurai Shanmukha Vadivu Subbulakshmi, not the Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan Bharat Ratna, Nightingale of India, but Madurai Shanmugha Vadivu Subbalakshmi. I'll just give one example. She and the great APJ Abdul Kalam were decorated with the Bharat Ratna on the same morning. She and Abdul Kalam Sahib had to go through the motions of what is called a rehearsal. I don't think MS had been in a rehearsal since the time when she had acted in a film decades ago. But like a student, she went through the rehearsal, and then she was seated next to Abdul Kalam Sahib, and he spoke to her, and she listened to him with great respect. He said to her, as he told others later, that he himself was a Vainika, he knew how to play the veena, and she said, "Oh, Appadiya, is that so?" Giving him great respect. And a little later, that very afternoon, when she was at a private lunch seated next to her, I said, "Amma, Abdul Kalam Ayya Varar, he is coming." She said, "Oh, but tell me, he was there just, tell me exactly, who is he? What is he?" That was the child in her. She was Bharat Ratna. But she was Subbalakshmi. A little of a mystery in her. But more than anything else, a very vulnerable person, which makes us realize that great artists can have very fragile personalities, and we must see them not as a finished jewel, but an extremely delicate human being who needs understanding and compassion. Just one word more about Subbalakshmi. She, as I said, had been in films. She was known in the north for her film renderings of Meera's songs. She learnt the language. No dubbing in those days. She understood the songs, understood the meanings. And she became something of Meera herself. Again, a bit of a mystery. For who knows the inside life of Meera? Log kahe Meera bhairi bavari. The people say Meera has lost her mind. Subbalakshmi never lost her mind, but she kept her mind to herself. So every time we hear her, we are in a process of discovery. Jai Prakash. Subbalakshmi and her husband Sadashivam had a great home in Chennai. And on one occasion, when Jayaprakash Narayan was visiting, I was fortunate enough to tag along with elders in my family to that lunch which they hosted for Jayaprakash. He came straight from a meeting of socialists in Chennai to this home which had nothing to do with socialism. It belonged to the economic right. Economic right. Among the guests was a friend of Sadashivam, as Subbalakshmi's husband was known, and Subbalakshmi, the great novelist R.K. Narayan. And I can't remember an occasion as vivid as this. As JP came in and R.K. Narayan was there, people said, "Jayaprakash ji," Mr. Narayan, R.K. So Jayaprakash ji said to R.K. Narayan, "Oh, I am so honored to meet you. When I am in America, I am often asked, are you Narayan the novelist. That is true humility. True humility. We have in the audience today Mr. Mani Shankar Iyer, whom I have the privilege of describing as a fellow Stephanian. Much senior to me, of course. But in 1962, rather early 63, very soon after the hostilities between India and China, Jayaprakash Narayan came to St. Stephen's College to give what is called a C.F. Andrews Memorial Lecture. And he was speaking on nationalism. It was an audience about the size of this, of students, in our assembly hall, which had Satyameva Jayate written on one side of the wall and an extract from the Bible on the head of the stage. And JP said, mind you, this is within weeks of the ceasefire. You know how our emotions were about India and China at that time. And JP said to this gathering of Stephanians, even the Chinese, as Asians, are our brothers. Now, I, as one of the flunkies who had organized this lecture, my heart sank. I did not know what the reaction of this audience would be to this almost explosive statement. But hats off to St. Stephen's College, hats off to Jayaprakash Narayan. He was heard in complete silence. Not the silence of acceptance or agreement, but the silence of decency, the silence of sheer culture, where you are in a position to get fidgety, get angry, be abusive, but you choose to be receptive, to be respectful. Jayaprakash Narayan stood for the politics of civilized behavior, which is totally compatible with very strongly held contrarian views. Last, I'll come to Rajaji. Rajaji was my mother's father. Shortly after I had made it to the IAS, with a batch of probationers, I was going around in what is called a Bharat Darshan. And that included a visit to Kolkata, where all of us probationers paid a duty call on the then governor, Governor Dharmavira. Before this Bharat Ratna started, I had written a letter to my grandfather giving him the itinerary. But grandfathers, as I now know, are grandfathers. From his small house in Chennai, he wrote a postcard to the governor saying, "Dear Dharmavira, my grandson is coming with a batch of probationers. I would be happy if he can stay in your Raj Bhavan when he is there." Now there we are with the suit of trains on our head, face. The last thing I wanted was to be seen differently from my probationer batchmates. And as our train steamed into Howrah station, my heart stood still when I saw a battery of liveried staff from Raj Bhavan, and just behind them, a big car from Raj Bhavan waiting to take me to Raj Bhavan. And all my batchmates nudged me, punched me, tickled me, and said, "Go, go, go, you." I said, "I'm not going." So when we called I said, "No, I'm not going." The staff were disbelieving. They said, You're not coming? I said, no, I'm not. I'll come to the Rajbhavan with the rest of us. Oh, so they went back a little dazed. So when we went to the governor, Mr. Dharmavira came looking very stern. Who among you is Gopal? So I stood up. What happened? You were supposed to stay here. Sir, I prefer to stay with my batch. All that is very well, but you don't know what a grandfather's feeling is. You have disobeyed him. You have also not taken my hospitality. This is not how you start your career. My heart said, this is exactly how I should start my career. So let me tell you that somebody who is as correct as Rajaji politically can be a very tender-hearted grandfather also. Let us not judge a politician too firmly or too severely. We are all fallible human beings. Chirag, I have taken very long to answer your question.
That's completely fine. I think we were all a little smitten by these stories that you were sharing, and I'm glad you did, and the time you took to do so. But a departure from grandfathers and their tender hearts to the 50th anniversary of the emergency, to more grim subjects, which we've just recently marked. You write in your book, the transition from Nehru to Indira's India was a shift from the age of earnest striving to that of fidgety acting, from the person Nehru being billeted to serve India to India being roped into the service of the person Indira. How must we look back at the emergency? And how should we honor its legacy, its afterlife, commemorate really the troubled, the horrifying times they were today?
The emergency was a nasty affair. Who can deny it? Nobody can deny it. And I want to say here very correctly, I think, that Rajiv Gandhi said what anyone in his position would have been expected to say about the emergency. He did not like it. He said very frankly, and I think, if I remember right, he said it in Parliament, that the emergency should not have happened. It ought not to have happened. But I would like to remember the emergency by the way in which it was resisted by people with tremendous guts. I do not think it is necessary for me or for anyone to run down Indira Gandhi or Siddharth Shankar Rai, Mohan Kumar Mangalam, the then law minister, the then Chief Justice, for all that was done. That's known. But the way it was resisted by people across the country, silently, bravely, people going into jail without knowing when, if ever, they will come out, that is what I would like to remember. And very simple people. And here again, I think, since anecdotes, like footnotes in a book, are very often the soul of the page, my brother Rajmohan and my late brother Ramachandra, Ramu as we call him, they were both in Rajghat at a meeting which had been organized on the 2nd of October 1975. They got special permission to have this meeting. And it was given only on the undertaking that there will be no speeches made, only prayer. Acharya Kripalani at the end of the prayer just turned around to say a few words, and the police that were there in great strength immediately moved in and started asking those who were there to get up and get into their vans. Kripalani ji said, I am not making a speech, I am only giving a discourse on Gandhiji. That was enough. Of course, Kripalani ji's discourse on Gandhiji would have been much more than a discourse on Gandhiji. But my brothers were among those who were moved to the police station. And Ramu told me that among them hurled into the police station was a little trader from Chandni Chowk who just happened to be there, and so he was in this thana. And he kept pleading to the थानेदार, साहब मुझे जाने दीजिए, मैं पॉलिटिक्स में नहीं हूँ. And then he said, अच्छा नहीं है. Then to prove his credential, he said, कल ही मैं भगत जी को एक थैला पकड़ा कर आया हूँ. Simple man. He could have been a character out of Shakespeare. But I must complete the story by saying that my brothers were let off the very same day. Because I think Mrs. Gandhi knew that there could be international ramifications if two brothers with the surnames they had were held on October 2, 1975. But on that very day in Chennai, the extraordinary K. Kamaraj, who was stunned by everything that had happened, he breathed his last on the 2nd of October. You cannot say too many things about these occurrences. It was emergency. It was the 2nd of October. The conscience of the country had been given a knockout blow. And the same day, Kamaraj died. But today, 50 years later, let us remember the guts of those who fought the emergency and not hurl abuses and stones posthumously at those who started it. That has to be done, but we should remember the guts. For all over the world, let me repeat, the forces of authoritarianism and supremacism are abroad, and guts are needed by people everywhere to speak up, to borrow the much borrowed phrase of Rabindranath, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. We just had a translation session. But let me say, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high is a great phrase. Kintu, but the original in Bangla, which everyone will understand, Chitto jatha bhoyo shunyo, Chitto jatha bhoyo shunyo, where it is void of fear. Uchcho jatha shir, where the head is held high. There is nothing like the original, howsoever great the translation be, even if the translation be by the same writer. So today let us salute those whose chitto are bhayashunna and whose shir is uchcha.
What a wonderful, wonderful message, Mr. Gandhi, for the times that we live in, and that's what I want to come to next. The India of today, and whether there is truly the freedom to speak freely, think freely, in the India that we have come to be in. How do we make sense of our democratic republic and the place it is in today?
Freedom of speech has to be seen in the scroll of the record of speech and in the record of freedom. It can be given formally and subverted in reality. The curb to the freedom of speech is not always or probably ever through a law. It is through the flotation of fear in the atmosphere and the ambience of the day. I believe that those who can give a lecture on the freedom of speech may do so and go home feeling they've done a good day's job. But the freedom of speech that has been spoken of, the way it is reported in the media the next day or the same day now in real time, is the freedom that we need to commemorate. Let nobody talk of freedom of speech, but be capable of speaking the truth as it is. And this truth has to be self-critical. It has to be self-critical. Somebody says, I believe in freedom of speech. I am the conscience wala. Put that aside. Depends on how and how truly it is said. I just want to say, up there in the skies in 1984, without any rehearsal, without any planning, then Mrs. Indira Gandhi with a script in her hand, you can't blame her for having a script in her hand. She has so much to do, so much to prepare, but she had a script in her hand. She asked Rakesh Sharma, आपको ऊपर से भारत कैसा लगता है? And he said, सारे जहां से अच्छा. Now this was Iqbal, he was quoting Iqbal. Can you imagine Rakesh Sharma quoting Iqbal from there? सारे जहां से अच्छा. Now सारे जहां से अच्छा says so much. It has so much in it. I asked Rakesh Sharma, who happens to be a next hill neighbor of ours in Kunur, Rakesh, please tell me, was this rehearsed? Did you know she will ask you, and did you know you will say this? Not at all. Not at all. It just occurred to me. It just occurred to me. And after I said it, she sort of giggled. It's true. You can see it in the video, in the YouTube. She giggles. And he said, my space odyssey is successful. But when I touched down, I think I've lost my job. And he asked, first question he asked, when he could barely get his gravity back, am I still in my job? He said, yes, of course. Freedom of speech. Sare jahan se acha. And I just want you to know, Sare jahan se acha, the most famous line of it is, मजहब नहीं सिखाता आपस में बैर रखना. Famous line. But there is another line in it which is not so famous. It's there in the song. We all sing it. But in my view, it is the most important line. Iqbal, he says, who in this world knows the pain of my heart? Iqbal, koi mahram, darde niha hamara, kaun jane, darde niha hamara. The song Sare Jahan Se Acha has this line, darde niha hamara. He said it from there. He was not talking about freedom of speech. But today, let us remember, freedom of speech is to be able to just say there is dard. And say it, if possible, in Hindustani. Translate it when necessary. Dard. To be able to say and speak about dard. And say it from the skies. That is freedom of speech.
Now to my final question for the afternoon, because I also want, maybe there's enough time to take 2 to 3 questions from you all.
Let me say, there is perhaps little time for questions, but there is no need for questions. Nobody need be obliged to ask.
In The Undying Light, in the epilogue, you argue that this light is dimming, but this light is likely not to die. Where do you draw your sense of hope from?
This is a rehearsed question. Let me tell you that. Chirag told me he will end with
All
this question.
questions are rehearsed.
But I didn't tell him what I will say in answer, so the answer is not rehearsed. I say, I believe that the light of India is not going to die, because the light of India is the light of Asia, which is the title of the great rendering by Edwin Arnold of the life of the Buddha. The light of Asia, the light of India, that cannot be dimmed. It cannot be dimmed, let alone die. But I say it will not die for the reason that, in my view, the greatest speech made by Nehru in his great speeches is not the tryst with destiny, but the light has gone out of our lives. He said the light has gone out of our lives on the 30th of January 1948. But he quickly added, self-correction, poetic self-editing. That when I said the light has gone out of our lives, I was wrong. How often have we heard somebody in the pinnacle of power saying, I was wrong? We can only hear them saying, I am right, I was right, I will be right. He said, I was wrong. The light that it will shine for centuries. It cannot go out. He was speaking of the simple man and woman of India. The simple man and woman of India who is at the heart lamp of this book. Self-critical, not self-acclamatory. Self-examining, not self-congratulating. I believe, maaf kariye, mannikunu, I'm sorry, comes naturally to simple people. Ayya, mannikunu, I'm sorry, forgive me. Tappasenjute, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. And most of all, please, as long as we can say please, sorry, and thank you, we are truly true people. We are simple people. We are good people. God have mercy on us.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi. Powerful, simple, elegant words to close on. Shall we take 2 questions? 2 सवाल लेते हैं. ठीक है. We have time for 2 questions. We'll have a volunteer go around with a mic. We want only questions, not comments.
May I ask you if you have already set a question?
None of these questions are rehearsed, and we would love it if you keep your questions very brief in the spirit of the next set of writers who have to come and take over the stage. Yes, sir, in the front row.
Sorry. So, am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So, I think very interesting sort of perspectives on people and circumstances that you've come across and met. In your vision for the next, or your sense of the next 5, 6 years, 10 years, what is your feeling for India as a whole? Politically, we seem to be having challenges. Environmentally, there are challenges. Foreign policy, there is all sorts of issues. So if you look at this sort of soup that India presents, what is your overall sense of the future?
Thank you.
I got the question.
You got the question. We'll collect one more question and then we'll have him answer. Anyone else?
We'll leave it with that.
Yeah. Question there.
So you haven't.
Sir,
Let me answer.
or in the meantime, you could
the
answer.
question that has been posed. I think I got it. I'll just answer it not by my own, as you said, vision or thought, but by saying 2 things. And they're both about sportsmen. When Neeraj Chopra hurled his javelin, and the javelin went and pierced the ground where it should have. And Nadim's did not. Neeraj's mother said, my son did very well. Nadeem also did very well. वो भी मेरे बेटे जैसा है. I said, there's future has a hope. Future has a hope. And then, when Gukesh moved those chessmen, and the Chinese opposite him conceded Gukesh's win, Gukesh said before the world's TV, he, the Chinese, he is actually the true hero. He is a great player. And I said, the world has hope. If two Indian sportsmen can say this of a Pakistani and a Chinese, there is hope.
A final question for the afternoon. If there's none, we could wrap. Great. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to Mr. Gopal Krishna Gandhi for being the light of our times.